The station called Nexus Vale floated in the dark between dead stars. It was not on any official map. No government claimed it. No Navy patrolled near it. That was the whole point. Nexus Vale existed for people who did not want to be found, and for the work that no one wanted to talk about. Resic walked through the lower corridors with his tail dragging behind him. He was Vathai, a tall, scaled creature with cold yellow eyes and a mind built for calculation. He ran a syndicate called the Pale Thread, and the Pale Thread was very good at making problems disappear. Political problems, corporate problems, living, breathing problems that needed to stop living and breathing. Today was a good day for business. A client with very deep pockets had sent 12 dossiers, 12 targets spread across 6 star systems. All of them needed to be gone before the Galactic Concord Summit in 40 days. The payment was enormous, enough to buy a warship, enough to retire on a paradise moon. Resic gathered his best operatives in a sealed room deep inside the station. There were 9 of them. A 4-armed Dreth named Sulkai who had killed a planetary governor with her bare hands. A Velu infiltrator who could change the color of his skin and walk into any building unchallenged. A pair of Torvon snipers who had never missed a shot in combined 60 years of work. And others, all of them the best in their fields, all of them expensive, all of them reliable. He spread the 12 dossiers across the table. "Pick your targets," he said. "Standard terms, half now, half on confirmation." The operatives leaned forward. Hands reached for files. Eyes scanned faces and locations and security details. Within minutes, 11 of the 12 dossiers had been claimed. There was no argument, no hesitation. These were professionals. They saw the work, they understood the risk, and they accepted. But the 12th dossier sat alone in the center of the table. No one touched it. Resic looked at the file, then at his operatives. "The 12th target," he said, "a retired military consultant, based on a neutral colony, minimal visible security. This should be the simplest job on the table." Silence. Sulkai the Dreth was the first to speak. She had 4 arms and not a single nerve in her body that knew how to feel fear. She had once strangled an armored hegemony officer through a hole in a blast door. She looked at the dossier, looked at Resic, and shook her head. "No," she said. "The pay is. I can see the pay, no." Resic turned to the others. The Velu infiltrator had already pushed his chair back from the table. The Torvon snipers were studying the ceiling. Every single operative in the room had suddenly found something else to look at. "It is 1 target," Resic said, keeping his voice even. "One aging, retired target on a quiet world with no standing army." "That target is human," Sulkai said. "I am aware of the species." "Then you are aware that no one in this room will take that contract." Sulkai stood up, her 4 arms folding across her armored chest. "Find someone who does not know any better, or do not fill it at all. That is my advice, Resic. Take it seriously." She left the room. One by one the others followed, not with anger or drama, just quiet, absolute refusal, like he had asked them to step into a furnace. Resic sat alone with the 12th dossier for a long time. He opened it again and studied the face inside. Commander Elaine Mwangi, 63 years old, retired from something called Terran Naval Intelligence. She now lived on a neutral colony world called Arden's Rest, consulting for a peacekeeping organization. She had gray hair. She walked with a small limp. Her listed hobbies included gardening. This was the target that made 9 of the deadliest killers in the galaxy walk out of a room. Resic closed the file and pressed his claws against the table until the metal groaned. He did not understand. Humans were not impressive by galactic standards. They were small and soft. They had no natural armor, no venom, no ability to regenerate limbs. They lived short lives on a single unremarkable planet. They bled easily and died from things that would barely annoy a Dreth child. By every reasonable measure, they should be the easiest targets in the known galaxy. And yet, he had been running the Pale Thread for 6 years. In that time, he had filled hundreds of contracts against dozens of species. He had ordered the deaths of warlords, admirals, crime bosses, and even a sitting head of state. Not once had an operative refused a job. Not once had fear entered that room. Until today, until a human. Resick needed answers. He left the station that night and traveled to a small trading post on the edge of the sector. There, in a dark room that smelled of chemical smoke, he found an old contact, an information dealer named Own. Own was Vilu, which meant his skin glowed with soft bioluminescent patterns that shifted with his emotions. Right now, those patterns were calm blues and greens, the color of a creature at ease. "I need to know about humans," Resick said. "What about them?" "I had a contract, human target. Every operative I have refused to take it. I need to understand why." The blue and green patterns on Own's skin flickered. Then they faded. His entire body went dark, something Resick had never seen a Vilu do before. It was the bioluminescent equivalent of a face going pale. "Drop the contract, Resick." "I am not asking for advice. I am asking for information. What happens when you go after a human?" Own was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper and his skin stayed dark. "Everything," he said, "everything happens." Resick leaned back in his chair. The shadows of the room felt heavier now. "I want to see the files," he said. "Whatever you have, whatever the intelligence networks have buried, I want to know what makes an entire galaxy afraid of a species that cannot even see in the dark." Own stared at him with colorless eyes. Then, slowly, he reached under the table and produced a data chip. He placed it between them like it was something dangerous. "3 incidents," Own said. "These are the ones that changed the rules. After you read them, you will understand. And after you understand, you will drop the contract." Resick took the chip. "We will see." "No," Own said softly. "You will see, and then you will do exactly what your operatives did. You will walk away." Resick left the trading post with the chip in his pocket and doubt in his chest for the first time in years. Behind him, Own sat alone in the dark room, his skin still without light, and quietly hoped that the Kvathi was smart enough to listen. Most of them were, eventually. The ones who were not, well. That was what the files were for. Resick sat in his private quarters aboard Nexus Vale and plugged the data chip into his terminal. The lights were off. The door was locked. He wanted no distractions. He wanted to understand. The chip contained 3 files. Each one was sealed with the highest classification markers the galactic intelligence networks used. Someone had buried these deep, deep enough that most people would never find them. But Own was not most people, and information was his only trade. Resick opened the first file. It was called the Iron Choir Incident, and it had happened 15 years ago. The Iron Choir was a Torvan mercenary company, 46 members, all veterans, all decorated. They were considered one of the finest private military units in the outer systems, and they had never failed a contract. Their reputation was spotless and their methods were brutal. A political faction hired them to kidnap the young daughter of a human diplomat stationed on a border world. The goal was leverage, force the diplomat to change her vote at an upcoming trade summit. Simple work for professionals of their caliber. The Torvan did not ask questions about morality. They asked about payment, and the payment was good. They took the child from a park in broad daylight. Clean extraction. No witnesses. They moved her across 2 relay jumps to a safe house on a moon that did not officially exist. Everything went according to plan. For 11 hours. At hour 12, the first operative in the safe house chain went dark. His communications simply stopped. At hour 15, 2 more went silent. At hour 20, the Iron Choir's leadership realized that someone was coming for them. Not a fleet, not a strike team. The movement patterns suggested a single individual. One person. They fortified. They called in reinforcements. They activated every security measure they had. It did not matter. By hour 30 it was over. Not in the way they expected. There was no bloodbath, no pile of bodies. What happened was worse. Every financial account the Iron Choir held was drained to zero. Every false identity their members used was exposed on public networks. Every crime they had committed for the last 20 years was packaged into neat files and delivered to the governments of 9 different species simultaneously. The ones who ran were tracked. The ones who hid were found. The ones who fought back discovered that their weapons had been remotely disabled through firmware exploits they did not even know existed. The child was returned to her mother without a scratch. She said a nice person had given her candy and told her everything would be okay. The Iron Choir ceased to exist, not because its members were killed, most of them survived. They ceased to exist because they had nothing left. No money, no identities, no safe harbor in any system. 46 of the most dangerous mercenaries in the galaxy were turned into beggars in 30 hours. The operative who did it was never identified. No government claimed involvement. No agency took credit. The only evidence was a single message left on the Iron Choir's last functioning terminal. She is 7 years old. Resic read the file twice, then he opened the second one. This one was called the 528 incident, named after the designation of the colony where it happened. A Jaurine bioweapons cartel had decided that a human colony administrator was bad for business. The administrator had been cracking down on illegal chemical shipments moving through her system, and the cartel's profits were suffering. They decided to remove her with a tailored nerve toxin deployed at a public gathering. Elegant, untraceable, professional. The toxin was designed to kill any mammalian species within seconds. They deployed it perfectly. The delivery was flawless. The administrator survived. Not because of any countermeasure or advanced technology. She survived because of a random genetic variation in her liver enzymes that processed the toxin differently than expected. Humans, it turned out, were wildly inconsistent at the biological level. What killed one human might merely sicken another. The cartel had not accounted for this, because no one had ever needed to account for it before. The administrator spent 3 days in a medical facility and then went back to work. The cartel assumed the matter was closed, a failed attempt, unfortunate but manageable. They were wrong. The human response did not come from warships or soldiers. It came from accountants, forensic financial analysts, cyber warfare specialists, legal experts. Within one standard galactic week, the cartel's entire financial network spanning 9 star systems was frozen. Not seized. Frozen. Every account, every shell company, every hidden fund locked in place where the cartel could see their money but not touch it. Then came the lawyers. Human lawyers, working with legal teams from 6 different species, filed simultaneous charges in 17 jurisdictions. The paperwork alone was said to fill a small cargo ship. Every loophole the cartel had exploited for decades was closed. Every bribed official was exposed. Every secret deal was made public. The cartel's leadership was arrested, tried, and convicted in 8 different courts across 5 species legal systems. Their entire organization was dismantled not with bullets, but with documents, not with explosions, but with evidence. The humans had not sent a single soldier. They had sent something far more dangerous, people who understood systems, and who had the patience to take those systems apart piece by piece. Resic's scales felt cold. He opened the 3rd file. This one had no official name. The intelligence network simply called it Reth Solar. Reth Solar was a famine-stricken colony on the edge of contested space. Several species had aid workers there, but the conditions were dangerous. A rogue military faction controlled the region and used starvation as a political tool. A human aid worker named Catherine Bell was stationed there. She was 29 years old. She was not military. She was not intelligence. She was a nurse who had volunteered to help distribute food to dying children. She had no strategic value, no political importance, and no connections to power. The faction killed her. They shot her at a supply depot in front of dozens of witnesses. They did it as a warning to the other aid organizations. They expected the same response they always got: formal protests, a sternly worded statement, and eventual silence. That is not what happened. What happened was that humans did not measure their response by the rank or importance of the person who was killed. They measured it by something else entirely, something that the faction did not have a word for, but that humans called principle. Within a month, the faction began to collapse, not from military attack, from 1,000 small cuts. Their communications were intercepted and leaked. Their supply lines were disrupted by anonymous interference. Their financial backers received detailed files outlining every war crime the faction had committed, along with evidence that would stand up in any court. Journalists across the galaxy began publishing stories. Investigations opened in systems that had previously ignored the region. The people doing this were not soldiers or spies. They were civilians. Human civilians scattered across dozens of worlds who had never met Catherine Bell, who had no orders from any government, and who would never be paid for their work. They did it because a young woman who was trying to feed children had been murdered, and that was enough. Within a year, the faction no longer existed. Its leaders were in prison or in hiding. Its territory was under international control, and on the wall of the rebuilt supply depot on Reth Salar, someone had put up a small metal sign that read, "Catherine Bell fed children here." Resic turned off the terminal. He sat in the dark for a very long time. 3 incidents, 3 different situations, 3 different kinds of response, but the same thing at the core of each one: a species that did not calculate its retaliation based on cost and benefit. A species that responded to harm with a kind of fury that was patient and thorough, and absolutely without end. He finally understood what Sulkai had known, what Own had known, what every experienced operative in the galaxy had learned, one way or another. You could kill a human. That was the easy part. But what came after was not something you could fight, or hide from, or buy your way out of. What came after was the weight of an entire species deciding, without orders or coordination, that you had made a mistake. And they would make sure you understood that, for as long as it took. Resic looked at the 12th dossier sitting on his desk. Commander Elaine Mwangi, 63 years old, gray hair, walks with a limp, grows orchids. He should have been less afraid of her than anyone else on that list. He was more afraid of her than all of them combined. Resic tried for 2 weeks to fill the contract. He reached out to freelancers, independent operators, and small crews across 4 sectors. He offered double the standard rate, then triple. The responses were all the same: polite refusals, sudden schedule conflicts, communications that simply went unanswered. The client was growing impatient. The summit was approaching. 11 targets had already been handled, cleanly and quietly, exactly as the pale thread was known for. But the 12th, the human, remained untouched, and the client made it very clear that partial completion was not acceptable. That was when Yekru answered the call. Yekru was Selachi, a predator species from a high-gravity ocean world. His people were built for violence in ways that most species could only imagine: dense muscle over thick bone, skin that could turn a knife blade, reflexes that operated faster than conscious thought. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, and when he moved, it was with the smooth, terrible efficiency of something that had spent millions of years at the top of a food chain. He was also young, 26 in standard years, talented and ambitious, with a growing reputation and a list of successful contracts that was impressive for his age. But he had never worked in human space. He had never dealt with humans directly. His experience was limited to the outer systems, where humans were rare and their reputation was just another story told in bars. He read the dossier and saw what Resic's other operatives had seen, a retired old woman on a quiet world with no visible security. He did not see what they saw behind that. He saw only the target and the money. "I will take it," he told Resic over an encrypted channel. "Standard terms." "You should know," Resic said carefully, "that 9 of my best operatives refused this contract. All of them because of the species of the target." Yekru made a sound that was the Selachi equivalent of a laugh, a low clicking in his throat. "Old hunters see ghosts in every shadow. I see an aging female on a peaceful colony. This will be simple work." Resic paused. He thought of the files Owen had shown him. He thought of the iron choir scattered and broken. He thought of the cartel buried under paper. He thought of the faction on Rethsaler erased by people who were not even soldiers. "Be careful," was all he said. Yekru arrived on Arden's Rest 3 days later under a false identity. The colony was small and green, a pleasant world of rolling hills and modest towns, populated by a mix of species who valued peace and quiet. Commander Elaine Mwangi lived in a house on the edge of the main settlement, surrounded by a garden that she tended herself every morning. Yekru began his surveillance the way he always did, methodical, patient, professional. He mapped her daily routine. She woke early. She worked in her garden. She walked to a small office in town where she consulted for the peacekeeping body. She ate lunch at the same place most days, a small restaurant run by a Vilu family. She returned home in the afternoon. She read. She slept. No guards, no security systems that he could detect, no weapons visible anywhere in or around her home. She moved slowly because of her limp. She was alone most of the time. By every measure he knew, this was the easiest contract he had ever been given. On the 3rd day he finalized his plan, a quiet entry at night, a fast, clean method. He would be off-world before morning. On the 4th day, he returned to his rented room to prepare his equipment. He checked the door locked, exactly as he had left it. He checked the windows sealed. He scanned for surveillance devices, nothing. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Except for the note on his pillow. It was written on plain white paper in neat, careful handwriting. And it was written in Selachi script, his own language, a language that fewer than 100 non-Selachi in the entire galaxy could read. The note said, "You have 72 hours to leave this system. This is your only courtesy." Yekru stood perfectly still for a long time. His predator instincts, sharpened by millions of years of evolution, screamed at him that something was very wrong. His door had not been opened. His windows had not been touched. His security measures had not been tripped. Someone had entered his room, left a note in his native language, and departed without leaving a single trace. He swept the room again. Nothing. He checked his ship's logs, no unauthorized access. He reviewed every piece of surveillance footage from the corridor outside. No one had come or gone. It was as if the note had simply appeared. His first instinct was to run. Every survival reflex he had told him to get on his ship and leave this system and never come back. But his pride held him in place. He had taken the contract. He had given his word. He was Selachi. He did not flee from unsigned letters. He decided to accelerate his timeline. He would make his move the next night instead of waiting. On the 5th day, his financial accounts were frozen, every single one, not just the accounts linked to this contract, all of them. His savings, his operational funds, his emergency reserves on 3 different worlds, all locked. When he tried to contact his financial brokers, their systems told him that his accounts were under review for suspected criminal activity. No further information was available. On the 6th day, his ship's registration was flagged. Every port authority in the sector received an alert that his vessel was linked to an ongoing investigation. If he tried to leave, he would be stopped, boarded, and detained. He was trapped on the surface. On the 7th day, his identities began to burn. Every alias he had used in his career, 6 of them, carefully built over years, appeared on the Bounty network simultaneously. Not posted by any government or agency. Posted by no one. They simply appeared, complete with his real biometric data, his real species profile, and a detailed list of every contract he had fulfilled in the last 4 years. He was no longer a ghost. He was the most visible person in the sector. Yekru sat in his room and felt something he had not felt since he was a child swimming in the deep waters of his home world, when the shadow of something much larger had passed beneath him. He felt small. But he was Selachi, and Selachi did not surrender to fear. He had one chance left: complete the contract, use the chaos as cover, and find a way off-world in the confusion. It was a terrible plan. He knew it was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan he had. That night he approached Mwangi's house on foot. No lights inside, no movement. He disabled the simple lock on the back door, the only security she seemed to have, and stepped inside. His weapon was drawn. His senses were at their sharpest. His hearts were beating fast. He moved through the dark hallway and into the kitchen, and there he stopped. The lights came on. Elaine Mwangi sat at her kitchen table. She was wearing a simple sweater and holding a cup of tea. Her gray hair was pulled back. Her expression was calm, not frightened, not angry, just calm. The kind of calm that belonged to someone who had expected him exactly when he arrived. She was not alone. Across from her sat 2 humans, a man and a woman. The man was tall and lean, perhaps 50 years old, with dark skin and steady eyes that watched Yekru the way a scientist watches an experiment. The woman was younger, maybe 35, with short black hair and hands that rested on the table with deliberate stillness. Neither of them wore uniforms. Neither of them appeared to be armed. But something about them, something in the way they sat, in the way they breathed, in the way they looked at him without surprise, made every predator instinct in Yekru's body tell him that he was not the most dangerous creature in this room. Mwangi looked at him. She looked at the weapon in his hand. Then she looked at the empty chair at the table where a 4th cup of tea sat steaming. "Sit down, son," she said. Her voice was warm and unhurried, like a grandmother inviting a neighbor for a visit. "Put that away. You will not need it tonight." She took a slow sip of her tea. "Let us talk about your future." The man sitting across from Mwangi was Jonah Ape. He was 52 years old. He had served in Terran Naval Intelligence for 20 years before retiring officially to become what he called a freelance consultant. In reality, he solved problems, quiet problems, the kind that never appeared in any report. The woman was Lin Zhao. She was 36. On paper, she did not exist. No birth certificate, no employment record, no tax file, no digital footprint of any kind in any system anywhere in the galaxy. She was a cyber warfare specialist, and she was very possibly the most dangerous person in the room, not because of what she could do with a weapon, but because of what she could do with a terminal. They had arrived on Arden's Rest 4 days ago, 12 hours after the network had flagged the threat against Mwangi. Yekru stood in the kitchen doorway with his weapon still raised, his muscles locked, his instincts screaming at him to fight or flee. But there was nowhere to flee to. His ship was grounded. His money was gone. His identities were ash. And the 3 humans in front of him were looking at him with the patient calm of people who had already won and were simply waiting for him to realize it. Slowly he lowered the weapon. He did not sit down. "Who are you?" he asked. "People who would rather have tea than trouble," Jonah said. He gestured again to the empty chair. "Sit, please. This conversation will go better for everyone if you are comfortable." Yekru sat. He did not touch the tea. Mwangi studied him with eyes that had seen more than he could imagine. 30 years in naval intelligence. A career built on reading people the way others read books, quickly, completely, without missing a word. She saw a young predator, talented and proud, who had walked into something far bigger than he understood. You were hired to kill me, she said. It was not a question. Yekru said nothing. That is fine, she continued. We are not interested in who hired you. We already know. We are interested in what happens next. Lin Zhao spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet and precise. Your accounts will remain frozen for as long as we want them frozen. Your identities will remain burned for as long as we want them burned. Your ship will remain grounded until we decide otherwise. This is not a negotiation. These are facts. What do you want? Yekru asked. We want you to disappear, Jonah said. New identity, new sector, new life. You walk away from this profession entirely. And you never take a contract against a human again. In return, your accounts will be unlocked, your ship will be cleared, and your old identities will be scrubbed from the networks. You will be clean. And if I refuse? Jonah took a sip of his tea. Then everything we have, every contract you have ever completed, every client you have ever served, every crime you have ever committed gets sent to every government, every syndicate, and every intelligence agency in the galaxy. Simultaneously. You will have no friends, no allies, and no safe place anywhere in known space. The room was quiet. Yekru looked at the three humans, an old woman with a limp, a middle-aged man with gentle eyes, a young woman who barely seemed to be paying attention. None of them looked dangerous. None of them looked like the kind of people who could dismantle a professional assassin's entire existence in 7 days. And yet they had. How did you know I was coming? He asked. Mwangi smiled. We always know. That was the part that Yekru did not understand. And it was the part that Jonah thought about often, late at night, when he wondered at the thing he was part of. There was no name for it. No official designation, no organizational chart, no headquarters, no budget. It was not a government program. It was not a military unit. It was not even an organization in any sense that other species would recognize. What it was, as far as Jonah could describe it, was a promise. Somewhere in the deep history of the human species, before they had left their home planet, before they had built their first ship, before they had met a single alien race, they had developed something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to have. Not technology, not strength, something older and stranger than either of those things. A reflex, an instinct, a bone-deep, unshakable conviction that when one of their own was in danger you helped, not because someone ordered you to. Not because someone paid you to, because that was what you did. It had started small, villagers defending their neighbors, strangers pulling each other from burning buildings, soldiers carrying wounded comrades across battlefields. Over thousands of years, it had grown into something that operated at a scale no one had planned or designed. When humans spread across the galaxy, they carried it with them, and it became something that the rest of the galaxy could not explain and could not defend against. When a threat against a human was detected by anyone, anywhere, the network activated. Not through commands, not through channels. It activated the way an immune system activates, without conscious thought, without central control. The people closest to the threat responded first. Others followed as needed. A retired intelligence officer might provide analysis. A hacker on a distant world might disable financial systems. A journalist might begin preparing an investigation as insurance. A combat veteran might quietly travel to the area as a last resort. No one gave orders. No one asked permission. It simply happened. Jonah had seen it work dozens of times over his career. Each time it amazed him. A Torvan analyst he knew had once spent 3 months studying human response patterns, trying to find the command structure, the hierarchy, the central authority. He had finally given up and told Jonah with genuine frustration that it was impossible. Your species is organized chaos, he had said. There is no center. There is no leader. How does it function? Jonah had thought about that question for a long time. The answer, he eventually decided, was that it functioned because it did not need a center. Every human was the center. Every human carried the same basic program, help your people, and executed it according to their own skills and their own judgment. The result was a response system that could not be predicted, could not be infiltrated, could not be decapitated, and could not be stopped, because there was nothing to stop. There was no organization to destroy. There were only individuals, scattered across 1,000 worlds, who would act when the moment came. Other species could not replicate this. The Torvan had discipline, but they needed a command structure. Without orders, they froze. The Kvathi had ruthlessness, but they needed profit. Without payment, they walked away. The Jaurine had intelligence, but they needed consensus. Without agreement, they argued. Humans needed none of these things. They needed only the knowledge that someone somewhere was in trouble. That was enough. It was always enough. Yekru sat at the table for a long time. He looked at his cold tea. He looked at Mwangi, who watched him with something that might have been compassion. He looked at Lin Zhao, whose fingers rested near a small device on the table that he suspected could ruin his life in ways he had not yet imagined. He looked at Jonah, who waited with the patience of a man who had done this before and would do it again. "How many of you are there?" Yekru asked. Jonah considered the question, then he shrugged. "Enough." Yekru accepted the offer. He would disappear. He would take his new identity and go somewhere quiet and never take another contract against a human being for the rest of his life. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "The ones who do not accept your offer," he said, "what happens to them?" Jonah's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, something old and hard and completely without mercy. "They learn that they should have," he said. Yekru left. He did not look back. Mwangi collected the teacups and washed them in the sink. Lin Zhao packed her equipment into a bag that looked like it belonged to a college student. Jonah stood by the window and watched the assassin's figure disappear down the dark road. "Will he stay quiet?" Lin asked. "He is Selachi," Jonah said. "He understands predators, and he just learned that he is not one, not compared to us." Mwangi dried the cups and placed them back in the cabinet. She turned off the kitchen light. Across the galaxy, the network went quiet again. The people who had flagged the threat returned to their ordinary lives. The analyst who had traced Yekru's identity went back to teaching at a university. The hacker who had frozen his accounts went back to developing security software. The veteran who had been ready to intervene if everything else failed went back to coaching a children's sports team on a colony 3 systems away. They did not know each other. They would probably never meet. They had done what needed to be done, and now it was done, and they moved on without ceremony or recognition. That was the part that frightened other species the most, not the capability, the silence afterward. The way humans could do something extraordinary and then simply go back to their lives as if it were nothing, as if it were normal, as if it were just what people did. 11 contracts completed. 11 targets removed cleanly and quietly before the Galactic Concord Summit, exactly as the client had demanded. The Pale Thread's reputation remained perfect, or nearly perfect. The 12th contract sat on Resik's desk like a dead thing, unfilled, untouched since the day his operatives had walked out of the room. The dossier was still open to the same page, Commander Elaine Mwangi's face looking up at him with the mild, pleasant expression of a woman who had nothing to fear from anything in the galaxy. He now understood why. The client sent a message demanding completion. Resik read it, sat with it for exactly 1 minute, and then did something he had never done in his entire career. He returned the fee, all of it. Full refund, no explanation, no apology. The client sent 3 angry messages after that. Resik deleted them without reading them. He took the 12th dossier, fed it into the incinerator, and watched it turn to ash. Then he went to see Own one last time. The Vilu information dealer was where he always was, in a dark room in a small trading post, surrounded by the soft glow of terminals and the chemical smell of the strange substances he smoked. His skin was cycling through pale, neutral colors. He did not seem surprised to see Resik. You returned the fee, Owen said. It was not a question, he already knew. Yes. Good, you are smarter than most. Resick sat down across from him. The chair creaked under his weight. I have one more question. Ask. Has anyone ever successfully killed a human and gotten away with it? Owen's bioluminescent pattern slowed. The colors dimmed to a dull, thoughtful amber. He was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke, he chose his words with great care. That depends on what you mean by gotten away with it. Some have killed humans. That is true. Humans die like anything else. A bullet, a blade, a toxin, the body stops working and the person is gone. That part is not difficult. But what comes after, that is where the question becomes complicated. He leaned forward. The amber on his skin deepened. Of those who have killed humans, none are still operating. Their networks were dismantled. Their funding was destroyed. Their identities were erased or exposed. Some of them are in prison on worlds they have never visited, convicted of crimes they committed decades ago that no one cared about until they touched a human. Some of them are dead, not killed by human hands, but killed by former allies who decided that association with someone who had targeted a human was too dangerous to maintain. And some of them are alive, hiding in places where no one goes, living under names that are not their own, spending every day wondering if today is the day someone finds them. And the ones who ordered the kills. The same, worse sometimes. The people who pull triggers are tools. The people who pay for triggers to be pulled are targets themselves. The humans do not simply remove the weapon. They remove the hand that held the money. Resick absorbed this. He had spent his career in the business of death, and he had always understood it as a transaction. Someone paid. Someone died. The galaxy moved on. That was how it worked for every species he had ever dealt with. Death was a business, and business had rules. But humans did not follow those rules. For them, the death of one of their own was not a transaction. It was a violation, and they did not respond to violations with proportional force or calculated retaliation. They responded with something that had no place in the rational calculus of the underworld, something that burned without heat and cut without blades. They responded with conviction. I want to understand something, Resick said. I have studied predators my entire life. I know how they think. Risk against reward, strength against weakness. Every species I have encountered makes the same calculation: is this fight worth the cost? Humans should lose that calculation every time. They are fragile. They are slow. They have no armor, no venom, no claws. By every measure that matters, they are among the weakest sentient species in the galaxy. And yet, Owen said, and yet no one touches them. Not because they cannot be killed, because the cost of killing them is always higher than any possible reward. How? How does a species with no natural weapons become the one thing in the galaxy that everyone is afraid to touch? Owen's skin shifted to a color Resick had never seen before, a deep, rich gold that seemed to come from somewhere inside the Velu rather than from his surface. It was, Resick realized, the color of respect. Because you are asking the wrong question, Owen said. You keep asking what makes humans dangerous, but humans are not dangerous, not individually. One human is fragile, just as you say, easy to hurt, easy to kill, but you will never face one human. That is the thing you must understand. You will never, ever face one human. He let that sit in the air between them. When you target a human, you target all of them, not because a government orders it, not because an army mobilizes, because something in their nature, something older than their civilization, older than their technology, older than their memory, tells every one of them that an attack on one is an attack on all. And they believe it. They believe it the way they believe in gravity. It is not a choice for them. It is not a policy. It is what they are. Resick said nothing. The Dreth are stronger, Owen continued. The Torvan are more disciplined. The Kavathi are more ruthless. The Jalreen are more intelligent, but none of them have what humans have. None of them will abandon their own interests. risk their own safety, and spend their own resources to protect a stranger of their species they have never met and will never meet. Humans do this every single day. They do it without thinking. They do it the way they breathe. That is not rational, Resick said. No, Owen agreed. It is not, and that is exactly why it works. You cannot predict it because it follows no logic. You cannot prevent it because there is no organization to infiltrate. You cannot deter it because the people who respond are not motivated by anything you can threaten or take away. They are motivated by something that your species and mine do not have a word for. The humans call it different things at different times. Loyalty, solidarity, love. But the word does not matter. What matters is what it produces. A response so absolute and so relentless that the entire galactic underworld, filled with the most dangerous beings alive, has decided through painful experience that the smartest thing they can ever do is leave humans alone. The gold on Owen's skin faded slowly back to neutral tones. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Resick with ancient, tired eyes. You made the right choice, Resick. Remember it. Resick returned to Nexus Vale that night. He sat in his quarters and opened his personal log, a private record he kept for himself, not for business. He dictated an entry, speaking slowly, choosing each word with the care of someone who had learned something important and did not want to forget it. I have spent my life studying predators, he said. I know the calculus of violence, risk against reward, capability against vulnerability. By every measure I know, humans should be easy targets. They are fragile. They are slow. They die from injuries that would not trouble a Dreth child. But I understand now what every experienced operative in the galaxy already knows. He paused. Outside his window, the dead stars that surrounded Nexus Vale burned with cold, distant light. Humans are not dangerous because of what they are. They are dangerous because of what they do for each other. You can kill a human, but you cannot outrun what comes after. Not the ships, not the soldiers, the anger. The quiet, patient, endless anger of a species that has decided not by law, not by order, but by something deeper and older than any government, that every single one of them matters. He closed his eyes. That is not a doctrine, that is not a policy, that is a promise, and they always keep it. He saved the entry and turned off the log. He sat in the silence for a while. Then he opened his business terminal and added a single line to the Pale Thread's operational guidelines, a line that would remain there for as long as the syndicate existed. No contracts against human targets, no exceptions, no discussions. Far away, on a quiet colony called Arden's Rest, Commander Elaine Mwangi knelt in her garden in the early morning light. She trimmed her orchids with steady hands. She hummed an old song her mother had taught her, a melody from a country on a planet she had not visited in 30 years. The air was cool and smelled of flowers and damp earth. She did not think about the assassin who had come for her. She did not think about the network that had protected her. She did not think about the galaxy's fear or the underworld's rules or the quiet power that her species carried without ever naming it. She trimmed another orchid. She hummed her song. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid. She never needed to be.